Welcome to Ravensdale Bible Academy. Today's course is from our Think Again Christian series, Fake News. And today's lesson is Appeal to Pity. Now, we've already had a lesson regarding an appeal to emotions, and this is very similar, except that it's actually appealing to a specific emotion type, which is pity. And so we we define this again as the idea of focusing in specifically on one emotion, namely our sense of compassion, or sense of compassion. Not fear, not anger, but compassion. And what it's doing is it's trying to draw out of us a certain kind of sympathetic feeling, so that when we're listening to the news or we're reading the article, we want to be compassionate. We want to be sympathetic. We want to feel like we care. You'll see this a lot especially with, Democratic, lawmakers or Democratic politicians. They almost always start off with their statements for any problem with "I care." I don't really Doesn't really matter to me if you emotionally care. I want you to fix the problem, right? And so all they do is talk about how much they care and how sympathetic they are and compassionate, but they don't have any solutions. And so when we're looking at news, we don't want to just be emotionally charged, especially towards the idea of pity, because then that makes us feel like we're bad people. When we see, a bunch of people coming to the border, our first instinct is to help them, right? To show pity, to care. And if you don't, then you're an evil, wicked person who doesn't care. Well, that's just not true. Maybe I'm concerned about some other things like, drug infestation, or, trafficking, or, even from a standpoint of economics. So there's good reasons why we don't just allow anybody to come into our country, other than just, the appeal to pity. We see examples of this all the time, like in commercials, especially. You'll see the the starving child in Africa, and then, hey, for the cost of a cup of coffee a day, you make sure they don't starve. Or the homeless guy in the inner city, right? The scruffy bearded guy, and for $4.95 a day, you can feed him. So, these are appeals to emotion. We see things like crying people, or music that's used. There's that famous commercial with the animals, and they have that compassionate music that's being sung as a voiceover. And it's like, hey, if you don't care about puppies dying in cages, then you're just an evil person. They're appealing to your pity. Well, here's some more examples of what that looks like. And recently we had one of our congresspersons, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She goes down to the border, and she's crying, right? She's bent over crying. She's showing what? She's showing that she cares. She's showing that it matters, and it's breaking her heart. Of course, she did this during the Trump campaign. And by the way, it was the Obama campaign that started this concept of putting, the immigrants and their families, which included kids, in holding areas, which happen to be, have fences around them. So they called them, kids in cages. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't crying when Obama did it. She cries when Trump does it. And then after, when Biden does it 10 times worse than Trump, you don't hear anything from her. This is the classic example of an appeal to pity. And then the news covering this as though we should care about this situation because she's crying about it. See, that's what we're talking about when we say, well, then that's fake news. Another example is, using kids. We see this a lot, especially with, liberal Democrats. They love to use kids. They used it with Greta Thunberg. They're using it with David Hogg. David Hogg was a survivor of, one of our terrible, infamous school shootings. And so, because he's a survivor, which he wasn't even there that day, and he actually got on his bike and rode back to school after the fact. But because of that, now he's some kind of, gun expert on gun control. 18-year-old kid. Well, we're supposed to care because his friends died because he was in a school that had a shooting. That's just an appeal to emotion. He has no real authority, so anything he's saying is just fake. There's fake authority behind that, and it's because they're appealing to our emotions. We see here how that's used out in Fox News, and here's David Hogg's his Twitter account. I feel the need to continue wearing my mask outside, even though I'm fully vaccinated, because the inconvenience of having to wear a mask is more than worth it. It's more than worth it to have people not think I'm a conservative. And so we see how this is then this appeal to pity. Because David Hogg lived through a school shooting, we're supposed to just believe everything he says, and his politics then are amazing, and so I should wear a mask because David Hogg says I should wear a mask. And then the media reports it as though he's some kind of authority figure that we should follow. We've talked about this picture before too, where it's here's the scene appealing to our emotions, appealing to our sympathy. Here's this group of people, please let us in. Well, who doesn't want to let him in? Who doesn't want to let his wife and family in? Of course we do. The problem is we can't let 1.4 million people in. But appealing to our pity, appealing to our emotions, this then becomes the news that's reported, not necessarily like who he is. We have no idea who he is. No idea. And so maybe we should have some facts or information. The other thing we don't know is we don't know if there's somebody else coming from another country who's been waiting for 10 years and this guy just cut in line. How do you feel when somebody cuts in line on you? Another example of an appeal to pity or emotions is recently there's been, a huge, just anger and a lot of protests about sports teams that have Indian names. Most of the times the protests are from, white liberals, and they have nothing to do with being Indian, but they feel like they need to, protest anyway. And so they're going to appeal to the emotions. And here's an actual Indian, I guess, from the Cherokee tribe. And he says, I'm a Cherokee, not a Redskin. So the idea there is he's not a mascot, right? The argument is there's mascots, and a lot of times mascots are animals, right? And so the appeal to the emotions, they're treating us like animals. Well, they're not telling the full story. Mascots for sporting teams in particular are sources of pride. They're not sources of let's feel oppressed. This is a source of honoring people. This is why in Pittsburgh their football team's called the Steelers. This is why in Houston their nickname of their football team was the Oilers. This is why in Green Bay they're the Packers. This is why in Minnesota, where they have a lot of Norsemen, they're the Vikings. There's no disrespect intended. We're not treating them like animals. No, in fact, they're actually showing them great honor by using them as mascots. Now, the Redskin one is a little bit different, and because Redskin is different than like a generic thing like a brave or a chief, and so I could see there's some argument that could be made there. But again, it's still an appeal to pity rather than let's just have a reasonable discussion and argument. And then finally, and we see this all the time, we see that there's debates, and here we see, a legendary tennis star, John McEnroe. He's got 3 people against him, pitting him up on one side, and they're discussing this issue of whether or not a female can be the best tennis player in the world. Serena Williams is phenomenal, just an absolutely fantastic female tennis player, no doubt about it. Just nothing like her ever before. And I don't know that there will ever be another Serena Williams. She's amazing, but she's not better than the men. And so we see that this, you can even see here that this news person is just beside herself and so hurt because, this poor Serena is being just slandered by John McEnroe, this man, and it's like, but that's not the real story. They're just appealing to the emotion. The fact is that this is a physical sport, and physical sports rely on things like, hitting a ball over 100 miles an hour or being fast or quick and strong. And the males just have an advantage of that. That doesn't diminish Serena's talents and achievements. She's just not better than the best men in the world. In fact, she might not be better than 500 of them. And that was John McEnroe's contention. And so, are we more concerned with facts, or are we more concerned with feelings? Well, in news, and what makes news real or fake is, well, real news is based on real facts, and fake news is based more on feelings of pity and other emotions.